Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dennis Damon. I have been in the email industry for about 25 years. That was right about the time that Al Gore probably invented the internet. And in that time period, I've spent most of my time as a chief privacy and security officer. Today's presentation is not going to be about rainbows and unicorns. I'm going to talk a little bit about some problems that we're having here in the US when it comes to data. And the question I sort of want to open up with here is, how many of you guys have ever heard of the term the data-driven economy, right? Some of you guys have, right? So we know that, the US economy is continuing to be fueled by free flow of data, right? And a lot of that is because advertising has sort of, created that. That's one of the big driving powers in this for us. And it's what brings the services that you guys are creating to consumers. It's also the services of music and news that are being subsidized by that free flow of data. And also for the consumers, it's also the reason why for a lot of them, they're getting it for at little or no cost or free. Okay? And if you take a look at a couple of studies that have been done, Harvard Business School did a study just a few short years ago on this, and they had shown that the ad-supported internet has created about 10.4 million jobs. I know that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you think about it, here in the US especially, it's a pretty good sized number. It's also attributed to the US economy about $1.2 trillion, and that's up quite a bit. That was back in 2016, and that's double actually since 2012. And for those mathematical geniuses and people who understand the economy better than I do, it's accounted for about 6% of the gross domestic product as well here in the US. So you think about that data, right? How much data is there? And I know that for marketers more than developers, the question is there such thing as too much data? Right? Most marketers look at me and go, you're crazy, the more the better sort of thing. But it's been said that we create about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data per day. So much data that 90% of the data that we've in the world today was created just in the last 2 years alone. Okay? For the people who were mathematical geniuses and then decided to become developers and marketers, in the US, that's a 1 followed by 18 zeros. And for our brethren in the UK, that's a 1 followed by 30 zeros. That's so much data that 75% of the data that we have out there in our systems today is unstructured, meaning it's difficult, it's randomized. You can't index it very well today, and that causes problems for us. So much data that we always are leaving a trail of data when we do things with the applications, whether they're email, whether they're social media, whether they're on your phone or even on your watch today. But we're leaving a trail of data intentionally and unintentionally at times. So this is a picture of my wife's desktop. Not kidding you. If you've ever had a mother who has kids and homework assignments and images, this is usually what the desktop ends up being. Veritas, if anybody knows who they are, they're a data storage company, right? They have found that 85% of the data stored by many companies today is redundant, it's obsolete, it's trivial. And really, this hasn't sort of happened overnight, right? This has come on slowly over time, right? With the use of mobile technologies and other things as well. But it's also because storage is cheaper. I don't know about you guys, but just before the presentation, I just went to double check, but I checked on Amazon, and I can buy for $19.95 a thumb drive, 1 terabyte thumb drive for 19 bucks. It's pretty impressive. We're at today, just even last year. I think last year that might have been about 50 bucks maybe at that time, maybe quite a bit more than that. But because the cost of storage has dropped, it's making it much easier to keep that. But it's also making it easier for hackers to also obtain this data, right? To misuse the data, and for you to accidentally do things as well. And because of that, right, with those increased volumes of data, it means that you have a better or a larger responsibility to protect that data, right? That you have to adhere to the consumer's privacy choices. That as you're given that data, to use it appropriately, and to also ensure that you don't inadvertently make choices for customers when they've said one thing, or that you don't just haphazardly go off and change something on them. So the depressing news is, okay, for those who are too young to know what a newspaper is, but turn the TV on, open up your tablet. Every single day today, the headlines will scream of a new data breach, something happening, right? Hackers have gotten something today, or companies have done something with the data. They've misused the data when we've entrusted that data to them, right? So this is causing problems for consumers because they don't trust us anymore. They don't trust what we're doing with them. So I know that's a little depressing here, but I kind of want to set the stage a little bit better for you in terms of where does privacy come from, okay? I know it's not the most sexiest topic out there, but it's a very important one to us. And so when you look at privacy, right, the origins of privacy come from the 18th century, okay? I know history lesson here, but it started with things like mail, right, and letters remaining private. It used to be where, believe it or not, the census was only 4 questions. And in less than 100 years, it swelled to 140 questions. That's a lot of information for just the government to be asking you about where you're at, what race you are, how many people in your family. And within the US, the origins of that is in the 4th Amendment of the US Constitution, where it says that you have the right, or the right of the people to be secure in their persons, their houses, their papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And it continues on. But it doesn't address the digital realm for us. It addresses a very old style for us. Now, this next slide, I have to actually give credit to my friend Len Schneider from SendGrid, but this was an eye-opener to me when he pointed this out at another presentation we did. But in Europe, it's worse. World War II ushered in the worst application, right, of data collection. Nazis used ethnic identification to ferret out the Jewish and other minorities into extermination camps, into labor camps. And that's where it became very apparent that using large data sets could be used at society's detriment. It's why today in the European Union, it's why also in Germany they have some of the most strictest regulations that are out there because of things like this. But the idea of informed consent for us isn't something new, right? It was originally developed for healthcare, okay? If you think about this, you go to the doctor, right? You cannot get proper healthcare unless you admit intimate details about your problems. That's a little embarrassing sometimes, but you know that if you don't do that, you might die or permanent damage might occur, right? And we know that in the 5th century BC, this framework of trust was built into the Hippocratic Oath, right? It's a fiduciary role or responsibility between the patient and the doctor, where the doctor has now been given information and it can only be used for those legitimate purposes. And that any other use of that data, right, could be a breach of that trust. And it's written right at the very beginning of this. I will respect the privacy of my patients, for their problems are not disclosed to me, so that the world may know. You guys trust your doctors, right? Some of you maybe not, but okay. Research shows that people do trust their doctors, right, to give them that information. It's a pretty simple concept today. But the problem right now for us and what we're going after is earning that same trust, or consumers wanting to earn that trust from us as well, where we're putting the data and the information about our lives into the apps that you guys are developing, whether it's healthcare related or otherwise. So let me kind of slap you in the face for a second here about apps. We have to admit, though, in today's world, we can get through life without using a digital assistant, right? I know some of you guys are going, you're crazy. I've got about 6 Alexas in my house and this and that, but we can live without the technology that we have, right? Anybody remember this movie? Okay, this is my wife's favorite movie still today, but it wasn't too long ago that you actually paid for an email account, right? There was no any sort of data exchange. You paid for an email account, you weren't bothered by ads, and that was the end of it. But because of things like Gmail and whatnot, now there is that change. Gmail gives you free access, but in exchange for that, you're giving something up to them. I know that I can actually write down on my grocery list I need milk. I don't have to go out of my house and go, Alexa, put milk on my shopping list. I can take that list with me. If I forget it, I'm in trouble. But we know we can do that. We know that social media and online purchases aren't necessary. I'm sure you love going to the mall during Christmas, but these technologies are embedded in the modern fabric of our lives, right? Because we choose to use them. Unlike healthcare, if we don't talk about those intimate details, we might die from them. So if you take a look at the landscape today, right, I love this this is a reminder, and I'm sorry the print's a little small here, but 10 years ago, Google bought a small company called YouTube, right, for little revenue, for about $1.7 billion. In 2012, Facebook bought Instagram, where it had 0 in revenue, right? Then again, Facebook comes back in 2014. They buy WhatsApp for $19 billion, which only had about $30 million in sales that previous year, right? That's crazy if you think about it. And so you have to think, if that never happened, what would our lives look like? What if Yahoo bought Friendster? Or what if, Friendster bought Facebook? What would our lives look like today? I can already tell you that my life would be different, and probably not in a good place as it is today without these sorts of things happening. So it's not a bad thing that technology happens. It's not a bad thing that these mergers and acquisitions happen. It just means that consumers have to understand that the way that we pay today is privacy, right? Privacy is the currency that people engage in the digital ecosystem. That people need to trust that when they go online, when they work with us as developers and companies, that they've got to be able to count on that privacy, because we know that 80% of Americans today, they support making it illegal for companies to sell or share their information without their permission. And 80% of them also still say that, well, I want to be able to control that information as well. It's not shocking, I don't think. I mean, maybe some of you guys might have stopped shopping at Target when the breach happened, but it's not very shocking. But that's also what's driving the legislative landscape today, okay? Here in the US, though, there is no single entity that has a monopoly on privacy protection, okay? There's not one big rule that's out there. And so what we're seeing now is we're seeing definitions change. It used to be where an email address was called an email address. A phone number was called a phone number. Now it's called PII. Everything that we have on us that connects us to something, the devices that you guys are wearing right now, connect you to something. Even though that has some sort of random number associated to it, it connects you to something. Employee data, right? Products. You as developers and marketers are no longer developers and marketers. You're now a data processor and a data controller. Very unsexy terms, but that's just the way that it is today. And then what we see also then in the legislative landscape is countries like Canada who are bringing up email laws, privacy laws. I'm going to talk a bit about the US and the US and state laws here, but even here in California, something called CCPA. Brazil has something happening. Who here knows or has heard of GDPR? Quite a bit of you. GDPR was an opportunity to trim the fat for a lot of companies, right? It required you to review your processes, right? To understand how your data handling practices were occurring, to do privacy and security impact assessments, to map the data flows that you have within your businesses, and not just restructure them for compliance, but to understand what you're doing with it. To get rid of by law what you're not using. That's a tough one. To delete the information? Wait, I need all that. I need all that forever. Data clutter, right? And to also have that right for the consumers to erase information about them. It's changed the world for us right now, and it's what a lot of us are looking at. But here in the US, it's very clear, right, that congressmen, that state attorneys, federal officials, academia, they're all sick and tired of all of the stuff that's going on, the data breaches, the hackers and stuff, and they all want answers. This year alone, the FTC has held an enormous amount of hearings, I think about 12 or 15 so far, on all this stuff that talk about mergers and acquisitions, naysay competitors, vertical mergers, right? All the AI sort of stuff. They're starting to dig into it here in the US, going, what are these guys doing with all this data? And so in the US, on the federal front, there have been several different proposals for large and scale privacy legislation. We also know that part of that's because of all the elections that are coming up. I just lost my monitor. But again, we know that no federal law comprehensively governs the collection and use of information. Now, what we do here in the US is a little bass-backwards, as they say. Okay? We tend to do something called sectorialized laws. You guys have heard of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. It's a privacy law relating to your credit reporting information and who can use and who can't. Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, that's about financial information. Healthcare is HIPAA. Children's Acts, anybody under 13, you cannot collect and process their data without their parents' permission. We tend to only react to issues when they occur here in the US. Again, not having any sort of overarching federal privacy legislation. And so this is just a small amount, a very, very small snapshot of what's been proposed just this year alone here in the US. Usually every couple of years, we're fighting 4 or 5 laws that are coming into play. So far to date, as I looked this week, we're now got 12, and there's a whole lot more that are being proposed. I'm sure, again, part of that's because of the election time that's going on, but that's quite impressive. Now, I'm sorry, I live in the great state of Texas, and I'm in California, so this is my capital here, but the states themselves as well are taking that on. I mentioned CCPA, okay? Here in California, right, they now have a law here that recognizes and gives rights to consumers and residents of California to know what information you have about them, what's being collected, to know who you're selling that information to, the right to opt out of that information, the right to access that information as well, right, and to also not be discriminated against if they decide to exercise those privacy rights. And again, they have the right to delete that information if they so please. It sounds like GDPR, doesn't it? It is a lot like GDPR. In fact, the majority of it was modeled very quickly off GDPR. So it makes it much more difficult now for you as a business to have to jump through these sorts of different hoops that are already out there. But then again, you go back to the state side of things again. Okay? This is again a very small sample, but these are bills that are modeled after CCPA that are currently being discussed. And then more bills that are not modeled after CCPA, so a different set of rules and regulations that are out there. Then you take it further. Every state here has a breach notification law today. So again, you lose data, you're supposed to notify everybody about that breach. And then again, here in California, there's other different laws not related to CCPA, but there's an online erasure law about children. And again, that digital trail that I talked about earlier, where you have to delete and protect that minor's information. So the question that I have for you then in the room, and unless you're a genius, are you a lawyer? No, you're not. That's not our jobs right now. And so what this is doing is this is becoming a problem for us as businesses. And so what's needed now is standards, right? Without a federal privacy law, right, this patchwork of state laws that are out there will continue to cause consumer confusion, to fail to meet their expectations about what their rights are in the digital privacy world. Will, again, create challenges for you to build your businesses, whatever data that you're using. And we know that if we can get a standard law out there from the federal side, it will help people understand what their rights are, your businesses to grow, and will allow that innovation to continue. Because I think we all agree that consumers' choices should be manageable, right? That hyper-transparency is very clear, like plain language about what you're doing with the data. You know, you have to redesign your apps to allow them to understand that sort of stuff. So when you look at what consent should be today, okay, usually the US has been sort of behind in this area for a while, but consent should be specific. It should be informed, freely given, a genuine choice, requiring an actual positive action. And what I mean by that is they need to go off and check a box, as an example. And that if they don't opt out, it doesn't mean that, well, you know what, they forgot, so I have consent. That doesn't work anymore. In fact, that's illegal now in Europe under GDPR. That's illegal in Canada. But failure to opt out is not considered consent. And that if there are multiple things that you're using that data for, newsletters versus demos and other things as well, that you have to start looking at potentially granular consent for those information uses. It's not about informed consent. It's not about express consent, but about explicit consent. And things like this, a pre-checked box, is not consent. You should be having them do that. They should have information about the information that you're about to collect and how you're going to use it. And so despite this divided Congress that we're currently dealing with right now, right, momentum is building about, you know, some sort of federal privacy legislation that's out there. And we know that privacy advocates and industry are now realizing that the state laws that are coming about are a problem and that we need one single regulation. And that, again, here in California, the passage of CCPA has increased those concerns, right? That those will be unworkable if they continue. I think total right now is 37 state bills that are being promoted right now with all different things. So what's happening then as well is, well, you have companies like Apple. I don't know if you guys have been watching lately, but the last couple of keynotes that they've done, it's all been about privacy. They're making that a differentiator between them and other companies now. And Tim Cook has been really pushing that, where says that at Apple, your privacy is your fundamental human right, similar to what happens in Europe. That information, right, that lives on the devices that we all own, it's our information, and we have the right to keep that private. And that as they're developing their new hardware, that they're developing it so that you have the ability to choose when you want to share information. Right? You install any app, you install the Click app, it asks you questions. Can I have access to your camera? Can I have access to your contacts? Can I have access to your microphone? They're giving you that choice, and then you're giving that consent as you would like, and being able to revoke that consent. So just begin to sort of look at sort of closing this a little bit here, then what is sort of needed, right? Well, we know that strong privacy regulations, right, are needed, but we also need regulations that will help that economic growth continue, but also give consumer protections. That those laws don't, again, preempt innovative laws in the state that help us, like in California, build companies. But Congress has to look at a new paradigm, right? One that will not threaten the goods and services that consumers are becoming reliant on, the apps and stuff that you're developing for them. Something that consumers can, well, continue to rely on, that ad-supported aspect of it, right? To enjoy that free content that they get. I know I enjoy my free content. Why would I want to pay for it? And that consumers then also understand the exchange of information, and that they also support that exchange of information to be able to get into these reduced costs for the services that they want as well. So I know you're probably looking at this kind of going, this is a real pain in the rear. I mean, what are we going to do? There's a couple of things that I would want to go through here to talk to you guys about to help you and your companies grow along with the ever-changing privacy regulations, but also what we in the industry would consider best common practices. So I'm going to give you 10 of these. And when you go back home, start thinking about this. Even though that you're a developer or maybe a marketer, or you're not the lawyer, go back and take the reins of this, right? Participate in the discussions. Don't be afraid of the chief privacy officer. I'm not going to cut your head off. But have a conversation about the data and how you're going to use it. So you're going to want to go conduct an internal review and to confirm what PII that you're collecting. And once you do that, right, is it being sold to any sort of third parties? You know, what's happening with it? You want to then create or review any sort of policies that you might have, right, to understanding what the scope is and why you are sharing that information or why you need that information. Do you need the email address? Yes, we do. We need to send out a marketing newsletter. Do I need the social security number? Probably not. To also then go and look to make sure that the privacy policies that you have also comply with disclosure requirements if there are regulations like GDPR. The hard one, again, to delete what you're not using. It's quality over quantity now, folks. We have to understand that if we get rid of some of this data that we don't need, we put ourselves in a better position not to misuse it or for hackers to get a hold of it. To create policies so that when consumers do question you or want to ask what you're doing with the data, that you know how to handle that properly. To put together technological solutions so that you don't even have to do this by mail or email, but that they can go online themselves and review the data that they have. I remember when GDPR came about, I got a ton of emails from Garmin. Anybody still have a Garmin GPS unit? I don't. Well, okay, we got 2. I don't anymore, but they allowed me to go review the data, and I deleted the data without having to contact them. I just did it online. It made my life easier. To train all your people who are responsible for that data, right? If they're customer support, if they're a developer, if they're a database admin, if they're your CEO, they probably don't need access to the data, but train them. Again, reviewing those contracts with third parties and those service providers to also understand if they're sharing that data and also are they meeting the requirements that you have as well. And also just don't take their word for it, right? It's okay to ask. It's okay to audit these companies, right? Once a year, you should be going through, or maybe once every 2 years, talk to those third parties and go, all right, let's take a look at how you're protecting the data. Are you protecting it at the same level that I protect the data as well? So what happens now? Doing nothing is worse than something, and we know that something today is confusing, okay? Again, it's too soon to say whether federal privacy legislation at a higher level will be coming in this term. I don't know. If you'd asked me in January, I would have said yes. Asked me in March, I would have said no. Back in May, maybe a yes. I have no idea now at this point. There are those substantial disagreements that are happening still, right? That, again, trying to decide which federal law is going to be best and can it preempt state laws that are out there. And that these state laws will be a compliance problem still moving forward, and it's not likely to disappear anytime soon for you guys. And last but not least, that existing patchwork of laws that we had, I talked about sectorialized laws and the state laws, right? It will continue. It has not served us well as Americans, and it will continue to cause confusion and unintended consequences for our consumers that we serve today. So, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to talk.
Question right here. When I want to send an SMS message to one of my clients' customers in the province of Alberta, I'm providing PII to Twilio, and Alberta says that information can't leave Alberta. How do I deal with this?
So there's a couple different mechanisms to deal with, and I know that Twilio participates in some of these programs and processes. One is called Privacy Shield. Privacy Shield it's an application that you put into the US government, and what it's doing is you're telling the government and the other countries that you are adhering to the laws in the European region, and it's about, I think it's $200 to get into. The other way is something called model clauses that you will sign between yourself and or Twilio, and I know that they also allow that to happen too.
So it's a legal process.
It is a legal process, but it's a real simple one, believe it or not. So, yes, sir.
I've seen a lot of like payments related, like strong customer authentication spun off from GDPR. Have you seen any similar progressions in the US around not just PII, but payment and auth-based laws?
Not too much lately, and I've heard it brought up a couple times, but no one's really kind of run with it yet. It's probably something we should be doing, but it's just one of those things. So, anybody else? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.